girls love, women loving women, manga about lesbians, sapphic love stories, Yuri. I've been engaging with more Yuri lately, and one thing about me, I really enjoy learning about the history of things that I'm interested in, and I also really enjoy 70s shoujo manga, and in this case, the two kind of go hand in hand. So, let's explore the genre of Yuri, from its roots, its conception as a genre, and how we got from stories like Dear Brother to I'm in love with the villainess. So, what is Yuri? The word Yuri translates literally to lily. For anyone else confused as to why this genre had the same name as a lot of anime characters, but the reason this genre about girls loving girls is called Yuri stems back to the white lily being used as a symbol for purity and beauty in women during the Romantic era of Japanese literature. The term Yuri was used in reference to lesbians in 1976 by the editor Ito Bungaku in Barozoku magazine for gay men. The term Yurizoku, or Lily Tribe, was used to refer to female readers, more specifically the title of the column for letters sent in by readers. This may not have been the first instance of using the term Yuri in context of queer women, but it is what started the link between the term and lesbians, or at least made it more of a thing. The term began to be associated with lesbian porn manga in the 90s. Ladies Comic Misuto, or I'm pretty sure also just Mist magazine is the same thing, was kind of the lead in this, using lily flowers as symbolism in their works. When the term Yuri was first adopted in the West in the 90s, it exclusively was used for porn manga marketed towards men that featured lesbians. But over time, the term began to shift away from that exclusivity and began to be used as a broader term for manga that depicted relationships between women. Girls' love, or GL, is the general matching term to mirror boys' love, or BL. It's used interchangeably with Yuri, but never has had the connotation of being just porn. However, in Japan, shoujo ai is not the girls' version of shonen ai. While these would directly translate to girls' love and boys' love, and shonen ai is or has been typically used to refer to BL works that were not explicit, shoujo ai is specifically used to refer to works depicting relationships between adult men and young girls. So, not the same thing. Now that we know why Yuri is called Yuri and all of the other things that kind of relate, how did this become a genre? If we're going to talk about the depictions of queer women in Japanese media, we first have to cover the concept of Class S relationships, in order to contextualize many of the works that are foundational to Yuri. In the early 20th century, Japanese girls attending all-girls schools developed their own girls' culture that separated them from the patriarchy, at least during their time at school. Part of this was the Class S relationship, which were strong emotional attachments between classmates that often mirrored or were explicitly romantic relationships. It was considered a temporary thing, a phase as girls grew up that would end once they graduated and entered the adult world, where these girls would be expected to have relationships with men, and many of them did. These kinds of relationships were depicted and explored in media. One of the first Japanese authors to produce works about love between women was Nobuko Yoshiya, who was an active writer from 1916 to 1971. Her stories popularized many tropes that have become staples of the Yuri genre. One example being the trope of focusing on beauty and innocence of the protagonist. Does this also sound like the Yuri, or white lily symbolism that we talked about just a bit ago? Another example is her use of the bury your gaze trope, kind of. In her earlier works, the girls in her stories would face sad or cruel endings, often death. This became a trope in Yuri manga to add to the drama, but also because positive depictions of lesbians and their relationships were just not allowed. It's not all that dissimilar to the Hays Code in the US, and why a lot of queer stories or just anything that was deviant would not have a happy ending, because you were not allowed to depict deviant things or queerness as a good thing. so they would always have to be punished by the narrative in the end. Nobuko Yoshiya is attributed as a pioneer in Japanese literature, and she also wrote about Class S relationships. These Class S relationships were a way to explore queerness while also adhering to society that expects heterosexuality. Because at the end of the day, these girls in the stories would graduate, marry a man, or die. This genre developed through the 1930s but declined after the Second Sino-Japanese War brought about state censorship in 1937. But the girls loving girls would not go away. This theme of homosociality between girls would come back as a common thing in post-war shoujo manga. Many early manga that are classified as yuri by some database websites would actually be more akin to this Class S. Works like 1957 Sakura no Miki would focus on an intense, close bond between classmates at an all-girls school, using language that one would use for a romantic relationship or romantic feelings, but depicting a relationship that may be better categorized as really close friends, or that in-between of friendship and something more. Even going as far as saying the girls are like sisters, while also showing us really classic signs of people having a crush. This isn't to say Class S isn't yuri, but it's kind of in this weird sweet spot of it's yuri adjacent, it's the foundations of yuri, but depending on who you speak with, it may not be considered yuri for everyone. However, a lot of databases do consider a lot of Class S works as yuri, and I think it really just depends on how strong the themes of homosociality are, and I think that's really interesting. I really do find that fascinating. I feel like all my favorite things go back to the 1970s. Pretty shoujo manga, girls love, boys love, my parents. The 1970s saw a lot of innovation in shoujo manga. We have the GOATs that have retroactively been called the Year 24 group to thank for that. During this period, mangaka that were willing to push the boundaries explored stories and themes that were previously considered too much for shoujo. Because, wow, surprise, girls still enjoy comics past early childhood? Who would have thought? Gender, sexuality, and queerness were explored by mangaka like Ryoko Aikida, Keiko Takamiya, and Moto Hajio. But for the sake of this video, we're going to focus more on the depictions of queer women and their relationships. Masako Yashido's Secret Love, published in 1970, is considered the first manga to depict an intimate relationship between women that is not Class S. However, this manga does depict a relationship between two girls and a boy, so it's not always considered a yuri, but I do think its depiction of romantic interest between girls does help set the stage for yuri works that would follow, or at the very least provides a little bit of context for the world that yuri was born into. The work is mostly obscure, so the extent of its influence is debated. The following year, in 1971, Ryoko Yamagishi's work Shiroi Heya no Futari is published, and this is more officially known as the first for real yuri manga, a yuri manga that is not Class S, that is explicitly love between two women. It's a one-shot featuring a tragic romance between a stern, dark-haired girl and a naive, light-haired girl, which is a very common trope in yuri, and honestly yaoi as well. The dark-haired one is the more cool or masculine one in the relationship, while the light-haired one is the more feminine or innocent one, the doe-eyed ditzy girl. This trope is called the Crimson Rose and the Candy Girl dynamic in yuri specifically, but we do see something similar pop up in BL works as well. We follow Rezine as she starts a new life at an all-girls boarding school and has to get used to her strange roommate, Simone. Simone comes off as mean at first, teasing Rezine, but soon starts to show her affection as well. Unfortunately for Simone, Rezine is struggling with identifying her feelings and doesn't take it well when their classmates call the two of them lesbians. The English translation I read actually uses a derogatory slur, so it's not just like their classmates being OMG they're gay, it's more of a ew they're gay kind of energy, which is upsetting, regardless. The story ends with Rezine running away from school and returning to her family, and Simone getting murdered by a boy who was interested in her. Rezine only realizes the depth of her feelings after finding out about Simone's death, and the two are now bound for eternity through suffering and Rosine's ignored feelings that she now holds in her heart, along with the sorrow and recognition. While reading Shiroi Heian no Futari, I couldn't help but notice the similarities between it and works like The Heart of Thomas and Kaze Toki no Uta, other historically notable shoujo works from the 1970s. From the European setting, the doomed love, right down to the new student and the seemingly rude roommate that everyone is warning the main character about. Yeah, all of these mangaka were drinking from the same cup. Tragic romances cemented itself as a common trope amongst yaoi and yuri stories at the time. From the 1970s to the early 1990s, there were about a dozen or so yuri manga published, and most of them were tragedies centered around a doomed relationship. Shoujo manga in general were pretty tragic during this period though, shaping the genres with roots to this era. So it comes off less like the queer genres having to be really tragic, and more so shoujo just at large was having a big cry fest. This is likely due to the wave of new artists telling stories that centered on social and psychological issues and exploring more mature themes compared to the incredibly childish stories that were previously sold in the shoujo demographic. But it is also argued that yuri stories being doomed could have been a form of lesbian panic, where the characters and possibly the authors refused their own feelings and desires, or that patriarchal forces were responsible for the tragic endings often found in these stories. The exact reason would probably depend on the specific story and its author though, so it's really hard to say one definitive answer, and I also think it could be a little odd to retroactively theorize about people's sexuality. So it really does just depend on the author and the situation and how much is publicly known to really be able to make a good educated guess on why a specific story is tragic. Not to derail, but one thing that I think does contribute to the conversation is The Heart of Thomas, one of the earliest yaoi manga in 1974, had an earlier draft called The November Gymnasium that was going to be set at an all-girls boarding school. And despite changing the initial idea and characters to an all-male school, Moto Hagio still considered her characters to be girls, her philosophy being that boys in shoujo manga were girls without the social constraints of misogyny and societal expectations of women. She believed that being a boy is what the girls admire. So while her shonen ai or BL stories were about boys, at the core it was really about girls to her. At least that's how I am interpreting her statement and everything around it. But at the same time, the swap to an all-boys school and her later discussed with the original all-girl setting version of her story ties it to queerness and female sexuality. Some interpreted her words as anxiety about lesbian love, but they could also be interpreted as her not wanting to work within the old-fashioned and rigid conventions of the old Class S literary genre. But many works that fans consider a part of Yuri Foundations were more than happy to play in the context of Class S. Stories like 1974's Dear Brother and even 1972's Rose of Versailles, both by Ryoko Akita, depicted these intense bonds between female characters that teetered more into the realm of romance. Dear Brother sees Nanako having a stereotypical love confession to Rei, and there are many different ways the characters in the series can couple off into Class S relationships. There is no heterosexual explanation for Mariko. Despite Rose of Versailles depicting a heterosexual relationship between Oscar and Andre is written into the more stereotypical feminine role at times, with his character being emasculated with his blindness, and also he has the yearning that is typical of female characters as well. And the couple mirrors that of common yaoi and yuri tropes. They have the opposite hair colors, both of them are pretty androgynous in design. There is also a classic Class S relationship between Oscar and Rosalie in the earlier stages of the story, which did fall into the Candy Girl and Crimson Rose dynamic. The only difference being Oscar, the Crimson Rose, has blonde hair. That's literally it. It's just a visual twist on the trope. The thing that sets Class S stories and non-Class S Yuri apart is how their relationships are perceived by their peers. Class S relationships are normalized. They're not really othered, and in many Class S stories, we see examples of side characters also fawning over the same upperclassmen or their own desired upperclassmen. Whereas in non-Class S Yuri, we will have the characters face opposition related to their relationships, like in Shiori Heira no Futari, when Razine overhears her peers gossiping about her relationship with Simone in a negative light. This at least rings true for earlier depictions of Yuri and Class S relationship comparisons. Class S stories often showcase their female characters ending up in relationships with men after they graduate as well, and will downplay the gravity of love since it's not between a man and a woman. As we move into the 90s, audiences were tired of the tragedies, and works like Jukai Me no Jukai by Wakuni Akisato pushed Yuri away from the stereotyped dynamics and the doomed romance. Jukai no Mi Jukai is a short story within a single volume anthology, Odamari, about a girl who's in love with her brother's fiancé and eventual wife. It's not the happiest or healthiest tale around, but they do get to be together in the end. They become lovers despite one being married to the other's brother, and they get to live, which is a happier ending than what had come before it in the Yuri genre. The 90s also brought depictions of girls loving girls to the TV screen with the anime adaptation of Sailor Moon, which features a relationship between the side characters Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune. Its mainstream popularity saw the two Sailor Scouts become popular subjects of the fan-made doujinshis, contributing to the fan culture of Yuri and Yuri Doujin. Sailor Moon is one of the few anime that was a global phenomenon prior to the global explosion of popularity with anime in the more recent years. It holds a strong place in popularizing anime outside of Japan, and also was a fresh take that revitalized the magical girl genre. It's one of the most popular series of all time, and it includes two girls in love. Sailor Moon was credited for moving Yuri from a niche, tragic subgenre into the mainstream. It's also credited for the Yurification of the magical girl genre. So I guess we have Neptune and Uranus to thank for Madoka Magica. The explosive popularity also contributed heavily towards fandoms and fans of girl-girl pairings. This contributed to the development of Yuri doujinshi culture. Doujinshi and professionally published manga aren't entirely disconnected. Many mangaka would have started their craft with doujinshi, but also doujinshis can serve an underserved market. If we trace the semi-related history of BL, during the 80s, professionally published BL was losing popularity. On the flip side, self-published doujin were doing pretty good and even gaining popularity, partially due to the fact that many of these doujinshi were derivative works of mainstream shonen manga, which had Japanese settings, and this pushed the genre into depicting more Japanese settings instead of the Western settings that had become the norm in traditionally professionally published BL. Doujinshi also allows for more artistic and narrative freedom since they are self-published, and popular tropes in fan works do find their way into professional publishing as well. For a non-manga example, if you're familiar with book talk and fan fiction, there are some fan fiction tropes that have been very popular for, it feels like, as long as I've been alive. At least as long as I've been on the internet and participating in fan spaces, and they're now being used as marketing tags for traditionally published books because markets see that those are popular things within fan-made literature or like self-done literature online, and if it does well there, then it's worth tapping into to sell it. After the success of Sailor Moon, anime and manga featuring intimate relationships between women became more mainstream. Sailor Moon's director Kunihiko Ikuhara then decided to change everyone's lives with Revolutionary Girl Utena, an anime series with a sapphic relationship as a central focus. I could talk forever about Revolutionary Girl Utena. It's widely considered amongst the greatest anime of all time, and it really is that good. It's a coming-of-age fairy tale about a girl who gets wrapped up in duels to claim the Rose Bride and the power to revolutionize the world. Throughout the story, we watch as the main character Utena and her peers struggle with understanding and accepting themselves, and also struggle with being taken advantage of by those around them, and fight to protect those that they care about. The series has been widely influential not only in Japanese animation, but also abroad as well, with series like Steven Universe making references and the influence directly being confirmed by the creator Rebecca Sugar themselves. But back to Yuri, Many fans of Yuri still consider Revolutionary Girl Utena very impactful, a classic, and maybe even a necessary watch. The series is heavily influenced by shoujo manga at large, and Kaze Toki no Uta is even named as an influence. One of the first BL works, by the way, again, intrinsically tying Yuri to yaoi, at least in regard to BL from the 70s and how early Yuri and yaoi were two sides of the same coin, exploring female sexuality and queerness. The 90s also saw magazines specifically targeting lesbians emerge onto the market. These magazines were not manga magazines, but did include some Yuri manga, giving Yuri as a genre a bit of a platform that it was lacking. For context, there were no dedicated Yuri manga magazines at all during this time. But the first dedicated BL magazine, June, was created in 1978, with the second magazine, Allen, hitting the market in 1980. Yuri was not recognized as an actual genre at this time, though, and there were still very few works that would later be considered as Yuri. But that was set to change with one monumental series. The light novel series Maria Watches Over Us by Oyuki Kono really shook things up, bringing Class S back into popularity. The series ran from 1997 to 2012, with a manga in 2004 to 2009 and multiple anime spanning from 2004 to 2009. The series takes place in a Catholic school in Tokyo, and at this school, second and third year students may pick a younger girl to become like a sister, and they'll guide her and look after her. Yeah, classic setup for Class S relationships if you ask me. The story is more about the students and their interactions instead of a grander narrative from what I could tell. I have not watched this or read this yet, and I'm interested in doing so that is all the plot you're gonna get from me, because I don't want to spoil anything for myself. The important thing for discussion is that Maria Watches Over Us is a very well-liked series, and has been considered a representative work for Yuri novels, and also credited for starting the Yuri trend, with many big developments for the Yuri genre happening after the publication of Maria Watches Over Us. It definitely repopularized Class S, and its success signaled to the industry that these tropes, these kinds of stories, sell. After this series, we begin to see more Yuri works be created. It wasn't like a super huge boom, but fans of Yuri went from scrambling for stale crumbs to actually having new things to read or watch on a more consistent basis. Girls Love Lovers were finally starting to be seen as a demographic worth serving. And now that Yuri proved itself to be marketable, publishers sought to cash in. Finally, after 30 years or so of Yuri manga, we finally saw the creation of the first Yuri-centered manga magazine, Yuri Tengoku and Yuri Shimai, both starting in 2003. You know the genre is official when it's got magazines dedicated to it. Having magazines for Yuri specifically helped create a community and culture around the genre. It gave a central place for Yuri and discussions of Yuri. Articles in these Yuri magazines also sought to retroactively claim older works, creating the historical canon of Yuri that we've discussed in this video. One thing I do find interesting is what is and isn't considered Yuri amongst Japanese and Western fans, because we don't all agree. Take Sailor Moon, for example. In the West, it's a monumental magical girl series that happens to have queer characters, but in Japan, it is regarded by Yuri magazines as a monumental Yuri work. To be a Yuri, you have to be interpreted as a Yuri by Yuri fans. It's a genre decided by the fans, not necessarily publishers or even creators for that matter. I just think that's really interesting. It's not all that different from works like Banana Fish being considered a BL despite not being considered one by its creator. Regardless though, Banana Fish did depict a strong emotional bond between its two lead characters and did influence the BL genre and made a lot of waves, cementing itself in BL history. That's literally what Sailor Moon did with the depiction of Uranus and Neptune. Henceforth, Sailor Moon is a Yuri. I also think the general lack of graphic sex scenes in Yuri compared to BL adds to this more looseness in what is and isn't a Yuri. Many Yuri stories place importance on spiritual and emotional bonds instead of physical intimacy, which differs from BL, even heterosexual romances, where the culmination of the relationship, the climax of their story, centers around physical intimacy or sex. I don't think it'd be too far of a stretch to say we have Class S roots to think for that. That's not to say there are no sexual relationships depicted in Yuri works. That is not true at all. It's just the general vibe, and most of the notable works within Yuri are not that, which is different from BL. Historically, physical intimacy has not been the norm, nor is it the stereotype of the Yuri genre. We cannot say the same for yaoi. Unlike BL, Yuri did branch out from shoujo, and we see Yuri in male-targeted stories as well. Yuri magazines were not tied to one gender and age demographic like most manga magazines are. There is a difference in how Yuri stories played out, though, based on the demographic it was written for. Shoujo Yuri was more fanciful and fairy tale-esque, idolizing girl princes inspired by Takarazuka Revue. That's a theater troupe, by the way, if you didn't know, they're really iconic. Josei. Yuri focused more on realism, depicting relationships that the readers could find themselves in real life. Shonen and seinen, however, played into harmful tropes like the predatory lesbian and also focused on innocent schoolgirls. Male-targeted Yuri tended to really lean into moe and shoujo characterizations. Moe being this super cute, innocent, ideal character, and shoujo just being a pretty girl designed with men's taste in mind. Both moe and shoujo character types came from the lolicon boom of the early 80s, as mangaka like Hideo Azuma utilized art styles that deviated from and contrasted the common geikika or realistic and sharp art style that was common in seinen and porn manga. There was Yuri everywhere for those who had eyes to see it, or just those who wanted to read stories about girls kissing. But despite spanning all of the major manga demographics, teenage girls, adult women, teenage boys, adult men, there is notably less Yuri works when compared to BL. I keep comparing them in my mind because BL and GL as manga genres seem to share a birthplace, that being 70s shoujo manga, and started out fairly similar. But on the database website, My Anime List, there are roughly 10,000 more BL titles than there are Yuri titles. However, it is worth noting that My Anime List doesn't just keep a list of manga, but web novels and comic from other East Asian countries are listed as well. Basically, if you can find it on the manga shelf at a bookstore, regardless of what it actually is and where it originates from, it's on the website. But that's not to say Yuri as a genre is not growing. Throughout the 2010s, Yuri as a genre started to become more diverse. We still had schoolgirl romances that were popular, but we also saw new genre mixes and the formalization of a subgenre focused on stories about adult women. Also, the internet has helped a lot with the spread of Yuri and its diversification. Webcomics like My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness and web novels like I'm in Love with the Villainess did numbers. The beautiful thing about anyone being able to make a webcomic or a web novel is that everyone can find their voice. And it's becoming more common for popular Yuri works to be created by openly lesbian creators, specifically in the comic essay stories about the author's actual experiences. People love to share their stories and to read about others like them, to feel less alone or isolated from just people in general. It's also through the internet that stories like The Guy She Was Interested In Wasn't a Guy at All gained popularity. A webcomic starting as a short story posted to Twitter in the summer of 2021 and growing into a full-fledged comic serialized on Pixiv Comic. And a future anime has already been announced. It's been that girl for Yuri lately, or at least it was like fall of 2024 going into like winter, connecting 2024 and 2025. And while it does feature a high school romance, it feels distinctly different from the schoolgirl romance trope, at least in my opinion. The story doesn't feel confined to the high school that the two girls go to, and honestly, the basic premise of the guy she was interested in wasn't a guy at all could happen at any age, with high school being able to be easily swapped out with college or some other mutual space that forces people together. Yuri, as a genre, has been a bit of a slow burn, taking decades longer than its sibling BL to be recognized as a genre, and taking even longer to spread its wings past the tropes and genre that birthed it. But there's lots of cool things going on with Yuri. Many Yuri web novels are seeing anime adaptations over the past few years, opening these stories up to a broader audience. We even saw a Yuri Gundam, you know, the really popular mecha series that holds a lot of historical relevance to anime and the mecha genre. Here's to hoping Yuri can continue to grow as a genre, and I'd love to see it become more of an equal to BL in terms of the amount of series and popularity. They literally started together, please! These two genres are siblings. I think Madoka Magica was the first Yuri adjacent thing I had ever watched, with Bloom into You being a very distant second. Distant being the time frame when I watched these things. I didn't really start getting into Yuri until relatively recently with the Green Yuri manga and Dear Brother and Revolutionary Girl Utena. I like a lot of vintage anime and manga, and when I say vintage, I guess I do mean anything from the 90s and prior. And anyone who hears me talk about manga knows I love a good 70s shoujo. I just like the way they draw hair. It's the common art styles in the 70s for shoujo is just really pretty to me, and everyone's so fluffy and dainty, and I don't know, I like it a lot. So I consume a lot of things from that time period. Anyway, this has been my thinly veiled excuse to do a lot of research and thinking, not only about 70s shoujo manga, but girls kissing girls across the decades. Anyway, I've been trying to read and watch more Yuri, so drop your ex, please. That's been it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, this yap sesh about Yuri and where it came from, and I don't know. I thought it was fun. I really enjoyed doing the research for this video, and I don't know if it's going to be my next video, but I am working on a counterpart to this video about yaoi, BL. I'm remaking a really old video of mine, but doing it better. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye!